One of the things that Postgres allows us to do with their SQL is perform conditional statements. So these are things like if-then statements that you would see in an ordinary programming language, and we call them case statements. And even in this query that we're going to look at in a moment, you're going to see some of the structure from that. What we're really saying is case and end. So this is our case statement. And part of that case statement says when something happens, then do something else. When something else might be true, then do something else, and so on and so forth. So let's copy this, and I'm going to come into pgadmin. And here you're going to see, let's talk about the actual query itself. I'm selecting the property class and the assessment values from the parcels. But I've got a comma here, so I'm also selecting something else. Now, I've created a case statement. In this case, I'm saying when the prop class is residential, I want to multiply the assessment value by 1.04. When the prop class is commercial, then I'm going to multiply the assessment value by 1.6. When the prop class is vacant, again, we'll multiply by 0.9. That means the assessment goes down, and then agriculture, we can make that 0.6. So that you can imagine wanting to see maybe what new assessed values would be for a property when they are increased or decreased by a certain percentage. So we can run that, and that's done. So now I've got the property class. That was the assessment amount, but this is the assessment amount when it's multiplied by 1.04. And if we scroll, here's the vacant, and you can see it's gone down by about 10%. Well, one of the other things that we can do is let's select the geometry. We can run that, and now we have a geom, and we can go in and begin to look at the parcels. And here you can see all the property parcels, and if we scrolled in, we can look at each individual one. But better than that, why don't we just copy this, and let's move it into QGIS. And let's go back into our DB manager, and I've got my query result. So let's actually right click on the query result, and let's update that layer. And now we'll select all, Control V. So let's execute this. That's done, and now I can update the query result. But what I'm going to do now is let's go to properties. Here we go. And let's make it a graduated color. And we'll do, how about we do, let's say greens. That way it's more like money. And then we can do equal intervals, sure. First we have to select our column. So we'll call it new assessment. There we go. Hit apply. And I don't like that one as much. Let's look at natural breaks. We'll just apply that a little bit better so you can see some of the newer values in terms of where the property values are. I can say OK. And one of the other things I can do is come back into our query and change this and say, well, what if we were to update that by 10% or 14%? Then I can execute it. And we'll come over here and update that. And now we have new records reflected. But the important thing is to remember that what we did was we put a case statement, so that way we were able to see the actual values. We can do all kinds of different things and bring in all kinds of SQL into our case statement. So here's an example where I want to look at a conditional statement. And in this case, we're going to make it a spatial one. So let's copy this whole one, and we'll take a look at this. There we go. So I'm going to select the property class and the assessment from the parcels, and I'm selecting two values from the flood zones, the geometry and the zone. In fact, let's just highlight that and show you what that would look like. So I'll execute that, and there it is. So I've got my geometry and my zone, and we can look at those. You can see each of those. Let's go into the DB manager. So I now have a case statement, and let's format this a little bit better. And each case statement starts with a case, ends with an end. And notice I've got my prop class, my assessment, a comma, meaning now I want another column. And I'm going to call that risk, end as risk. So when the geom, which will be coming from the parcels, intersects the geom called G, which comes from this subquery, and the zone, and zone is also coming from this subquery, is AE, then we're going to say, uh-oh, right? That's the risk. When it's X500, we're going to say, not so bad. X, okay, else A-okay. Now, this is going to take a little while to run. I just want to warn you of that, but it will just give you an idea because we're going to move forward and look at different ways to speed that up. So let me hit execute, and I'll turn off the video for a moment, and then we'll return back. Now that completed, and it took 72 seconds. So I'm not going to really rerun it. I could bring the geometries in if I wanted, but the point here is now here's a residential property. Here is its assessment, and it happens to be outside of any of the flood zones, so it's A-okay. So many of these are. Another thing we can do is use the case statement to update data. So we've used the update command before, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to create a new table, and I'm going to say select star from parcels, our TC parcel, and let's do select star into, and we'll call this test. And test already exists because I've created it to test some of this out. So let's say drop table test. There we go. That's done. And now I can run this query. And we'll give that a moment. Well, that completed. And now let's just say select star from test. And there we go. So this is the whole, basically the parcels table that we've seen before. So let's come back and look at our query. I'll copy this. I'll paste it. So I want to update test. And I want to set the assessment value equal to something. Now in my case, what I've decided to do was set the assessment value equal to a certain percentage increase based upon the property type. And I didn't want to write out all the different property types, so just decided to do 3 of them for the moment. But here is again as an example of I want the assessment to be something new. Now, using the case statement, and I can move this over so it kind of tidies up a bit. There we go. So when the property class is residential, I'm going to multiply it by 1.05. When it's commercial, I'll update the assessment by 1.1, and so on. You can see this is similar to what we did before. That was remember, that was a select query. This is not a select query. We're actually going to update data. So let me run this. Actually, let's take a look at the first few assessments. Let's try this. Select ASMT from test limit 10. Let's just look at the first 10. Okay, so that's my assessments, 15,500, 135,000. So let's run this. And that's done. So select ASMT from test limit 10, and we'll run this. And you can see it's now increased in value because of the case statement that we put together. Well, I want to try something else now before we did that okay, and eh. So let's do that again, but I decided to change the query a little bit, which I think is going to make it run quite a bit faster. So now I'm going to say come back to the top. Let's copy this whole thing again. Control C. Oh, it already was copied. Okay, so we're going to update test, and I decided I'm not going to add a new field. There's a field called Swiss, S-W-I-S. It's a text field. We're just going to update that. Now, when the zone is AE, I want it to be uh-oh. Again, when the zone is X, okay, X500, then and then otherwise NA. Now, where do I get this zone from? Zone is not part of test. Well, part of my updating, remember we've already done this before, we updated from a secondary table. So I'm updating test from flood zones where there is a condition. So where the test geometry intersects the flood zone, then I want to perform this case statement. Now, since I've joined it on the flood zone based upon the intersection, I now have that flood zone value. So when the zone is AE, then I want to say uh-oh, right? When the zone is X, I want to say okay. So let's run this. And we'll give that a second. So I'm going to zoom into a particular area here, and you can see if we move the flood zones up a bit. Okay, so here's some flood zones, but let's select one of the parcels that are touching this particular flood zone. Let's choose a different one that we're in a smaller area. That one there, that's a good one. And if we look at the Swiss code, that's not applicable. It's not in the AE zone. I decided to classify the flood zone so I can see things a little bit easier. So let's zoom over here. We have some interesting things going on. I have 3 different flood zones. So we can click on, let's turn on the parcels, the test. So I can click on this property parcel. You can see it's highlighted there. And that one, if we look at the Swiss code, is uh-oh, right? Because that is in the AE flood zone. Notice it's also in the X. So what is probably happening with the case statement is when it first hits something, that's when it begins to apply it. Here's another one, another property parcel here. So that's in the AE flood zone, and that says uh-oh as well. And let's look at this property parcel. That one is touching nothing or the A zone, and in that case we said NA not applicable. So you can see in this example that we actually were able to update the data very, very quickly using the SQL statement. Well, what I want to do next is come back to that conditional statement where we did the spatial operation and change it into the same form we did before, where we're selecting from 2 different tables rather than embedding that SQL statement. So this is the same thing as before. Let's select all, copy, and I'm going to put this inside of QGIS. So let's come into query result, and then let's update the layer. So we'll select all, and we'll paste that. So again, we're selecting the zone. Oh, we better select the geometry as well. So that way it will know to update the layer. So again, where you have these different conditions, I can also add when zone is equal to A, then not totally okay. How's that? So we do something like this. Otherwise we get NA, and then we're going to end it as risk. So it's going to be a column called risk. Let's run that. And notice I get an error here saying geom is ambiguous. Why is that? Well, that's because, again, we're selecting from flood zones and TC parcel. So the way to fix that is just say TC parcel. Let's execute it. That's done. And let's have our geometries. We have our risk values. And then let's update the values. And back in our query, we want to change this query result, and let's reclassify it. So we want to do a categorize variable. Let's choose risk. There we go. And then hit OK. And we can turn some of these guys off. Okay, so now we have different colors. Here is the uh-ohs. Here's, well, that's just the watersheds in the background there. Here is the and here's the not totally okay. One of the cool things that I think about this is we did that with a case statement, updating this data based on these spatial conditions, and we didn't have to write a new table. We just wrote it right inside the SQL in memory, and here we now have our result. So there's a lot more you can do with case statements. This hopefully just gives you a general idea of the ways in which you can direct some of the logic and the flow of the program. And I hope you make more use of case statements. I really love using them. They add a lot of power to the kinds of things that we try and do.